I'm doing something a little bit different this week, and I'm going to be doing it for a few weeks. I am a bit late on this, but I'm doing Inktober. If you haven't heard of it, I'm going to put some links in the description, but it's mainly supposed to be for artists. It's a bunch of suggestions for things to draw, but I'm going to take those suggestions, and instead of drawing them, I'm going to be designing them using Fusion 360. So there's a prompt for every day of October, and you're supposed to every day of October do a drawing for one of those prompts. I missed it, so I'm now doing the first day in November, but I'm not really doing it to go with all the rest of the artists who are doing it in October. I'm doing it more for me to get used to Fusion 360 because I haven't used it before. I'm used to using SolidWorks and AutoCAD, so I'm just trying to get used to the way that the controls work more than anything else. But I thought it would be quite cool for you guys to see what I'm doing. So you can see I've started roughing out a profile here. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. This is the first day of Inktober, which was poisonous. So see if you can figure out what it is that I'm doing before it gets finished. So I've finished that sketch profile now, and what I'm going to do is revolve it. So I'll take what is essentially half of a profile, and then using the revolve tool I can make it into a 3D component. So you'll see, go into revolve, grab that profile, and then select the middle line to be the axis to revolve around, and it revolves it and it makes it that shape. Now at this point I'll tell you what it is that I'm drawing. So I'm drawing a tin of hairspray because it's horrible, the smell of the hairspray. I hate the smell of hairspray. So I thought it would be quite fun to do that. The poisonous one. It's not just going to be a tin of hairspray, but you'll see later on what I'm going to do to make it a little bit more interesting. But at the minute I'm just rounding out all the edges and things to make it look more like a tin of hairspray. I'm trying to avoid using reference images in as many of these Inktober designs as I can. For this one I did look at an actual can of hairspray, but I didn't take any measurements from it. I just looked at it, and so I eyeballed it and made sure that I had all the profiles in that I needed. So now that the actual tin is finished, I'm going to start doing the top, and I'll do the little plastic plungery bit on the top of it. I actually recorded this a while ago now. I'm just doing a quick voiceover to talk you through what I did. But there's a few things that I've done on here that even now, even just having done, I think I've done another 15 designs using Fusion 360 since doing this one. I've learned so much about what I'm doing wrong doing this one. And there's a bit later on where you'll see that I do things really wrong. It works out in the end, but because I've done it wrong, it really slows things down. So I've made the top concave now, and I've cut that little sort of chamfer in the back for your finger to go so you can squirt stuff out. And then this is the point where I do things wrong. I should have done this bit in the sculpt environment, because what I'm doing here is I'm adding in lots of circles, and I'm going to use all those circles to make it look like a spray coming out of the bottle. And I try to get them as random as possible, but people aren't very good at doing things randomly, so I tend to say that it's simulated randomness, because it's very difficult to get things to actually look properly random. But that's what I'm attempting to do here. I brought in lots of spheres, and then I scaled a couple of them down and moved them all around to try and get it looking like a spray. I think I did some copies. Yeah, I did some copies. I did a lot of scaling and just tried to get it to look random and spray-like. And once I'd got enough in that I felt like it looked fairly okay, you can see I did this cone. So the cone is supposed to look like the start of the spray coming out, and then the balls are like bubbles like coming out of this tin. And then I just spent a long time messing around with those balls and trying to get them to look right, and putting some smaller ones in, just trying to make it look how I wanted it to. Like I say, trying to make it look like simulated randomness. And then I thought, let's leave it at that. And then I actually started rendering it and thought it would be quite cool if I made it look like a skull. So I imported a picture of a skull that I just found on Google on Shutterstock. It doesn't matter that it's got the watermarks and things, because it's not actually going to be in here. I'm just using it for reference. This is one of the few times so far that I've used a reference image, but doing a skull off the top of my head was just never going to work. If you're going to do something like this, you have to look at it from different views. So I'm looking at the front view now, and I'm moving the balls into place, getting them roughly where I want them so that they kind of follow the profile of the skull. And I'll need to get some smaller ones to fill in the smaller gaps and to follow the profile. And I don't want it to be exact, but I want it to look kind of like those balls are conforming to the shape of the skull. So once I had the front of the skull looking kind of how I wanted it, I went on to the side profile and did the same thing, moved things around, got them into the right place, filled in the gaps, because you can see there's quite a few gaps in here, and got it looking how I wanted it to look from the side. It's not easy to get things to line up how you want them if you're doing it this way. Especially because you're doing it in 3 different planes, because you can see now I've started on the top, and I'm having to move things in at the top, and then you tend to have to go backwards and forwards a lot, so you'll go from side to front to top and just check everything and make sure it's all lined up from where you want it to be. So once I've done the front, I needed to cut some holes in for the eyes. So I hid all of the bodies so that I could bring in another sphere and stretch it out to make it into an oval shape, and then cut that out of the skull. There's a couple of ways that you can do this, but I found that the best way for me to do it was, once I had the sphere in there and in the shape that I wanted it to be in, and I'd stretched it and got it oval shaped, was to use a Boolean operation, which is where it takes one 3D object away from another 3D object. So I could combine all of those spheres together and then use a Boolean to take the eyes away from the rest of the skull. So once I'd done that and I'd got it how I wanted it, I had a rough kind of skull shape, and I'd used the Boolean operation to cut the eyes out, and then I just had to cut the nose. I used a draft when I was cutting the nose, so it flares out on the inside. That was just because without having that flare, it looked a bit odd, because it just looked like it went straight through, which it did, and that's not how the inside of a skull looks. It does open out on the inside, and it should be hollow, but this one isn't, and I couldn't really make it hollow. So what I thought would be a better thing to do would be, like I say, to cut it and then draft it so that it flares on the inside and it looks like it's hollow, but actually if you look inside properly you'll see that it isn't. So that's flared out. I then cut the two bits at the side of the jaw all the way through so you could see that, and then started on the teeth. For the teeth, I drew using a polyline. I drew around the teeth just as one line, and then you can see I've left gaps where some of them are. So essentially I've drawn every other tooth to start off with, and then filled in the tops of the other teeth with a separate polyline. I didn't join all of those up, so it wouldn't let me extrude it, so I had to go back in. If you're doing something like this where you're using polylines, make sure that, splines, not polylines, make sure that your splines definitely touch each other and not the control points. So you can see there's a faint orange line which a lot of my splines are touching. That is just a construction point. That's just to tell the program where those splines should go up to and how they should curve around. So make sure that if you're doing something like this where you want to extrude or cut or somehow interact with a complete profile, you make sure that you go all the way over and you touch and all of the points join up. So I pulled all mine out, pulled them over the edge, and then trimmed the edges off so that I knew that they came right up to the next profile. Once I'd done that, I struggled to get it so that the teeth looked right, and what I ended up deciding to do was offsetting that first profile that I made for the teeth, and then using that to kind of make gums, and then it meant that I had a tooth in between each gum. So the teeth ended up being smaller than they are on the reference image that I've used, but by having the gums in there, it meant that I didn't have to do each tooth individually. I could do all of the gums, and then I would end up with something that looked like teeth. And it still didn't quite look right, so I came back again and put the bottom row of teeth in and then cut in between the two of them, and then it started to look a bit better. I also extruded some of the teeth out a little bit more than others and some a little bit further in to make them look rough and jagged and uneven. So you can see that I've done that here. So you can see here I'm pushing and pulling, trying to get the teeth to look jagged. Some of them stick out further than others. And then this is the point where I'm cutting the gap in between the two. So I've used the project profile to project the line of the teeth that I used last time. Because all I want is the gap in between the teeth. I don't actually want the teeth themselves. So once I've picked all those out, projected all those lines through, I end up with the profile for the gap in between. I can cut that out so that we end up with a gap in between all of our teeth. Now I can push them, pull them, get them looking how I want them to look. And then what I did at the end is, just for some of them, I used fillets and chamfers and drafts again to make them look a bit random and a bit uneven. The program struggled quite a bit doing these fillets because of the way that the teeth are, partly because it's spline, but also because there's not very big gaps between some of the teeth, and there's some overlaps where one profile goes further back than the other, and you can see that in some of the teeth that are in the middle. You can actually see that the spheres that I used have come through, and when I try to fill it, it can't fill it all the way around because the sphere is in the way. It's difficult to explain, but that's kind of the issue that it's having. So I kind of just had to go with what would work. So some of the teeth are more rounded than others. It did do quite a good job of filleting the gums, which made the gums look better, and it gave it a little bit more definition on the teeth to make them look more like proper teeth with gums in. Are they gums if there's no flesh on it? I don't know. The bit where the teeth go into, anyway. So they look quite good because I managed to put quite a big fillet on most of them. This is where the main problems came in that I was talking about at the start of the video. Because I've essentially got hundreds of different profiles that are overlapped on top of each other, the computer's really struggling to keep up and the frame rate drops off, it crashes quite a lot. So this is where in future videos I'll use the sculpting environment instead of the modeling environment to get it to do this without crashing so often, because it really struggles to render all of the spheres and all of this extra stuff that I'm trying to do, where I'm cutting into those spheres and I'm extruding off them and I'm combining different components with each other. So in future that isn't going to happen. It's just, this was pretty much my first trial run of Fusion 360. So now that I've got that skull all done and I've got the hairspray tin that it's coming out of, I'll just do a very quick in-canvas render just to show you roughly what it looks like. I applied I think I applied like anodized blue to the can, and then I applied a white plastic to the top, and then for the skull itself I used a polyurethane texture, and then changed the colour to this green because I thought that looked quite cool. It looks like foam, really. I suppose because it is. So that is where I got those textures from. They're all just the standard Fusion 360 textures, but so you can see what the render looks like. And eventually I might make this, but I'm not sure when that's going to be. For now, it's just going to be a little sort of test design that'll be rendered properly, and I'll put it onto Instagram and stuff so you can see what the final render looks like. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. It was a little bit different. I'm going to have another 30 of these because I'm doing one for each day. Like I say, they're not happening in October, they're all happening later. It's more just so I've got a prompt and I can try and get outside my comfort zone and do something a little bit different. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back next time and watch the next video. Thanks very much. Bye.